Hello, everybody. Hi. Yes, no musical intro this time. Reason being because this is a little bit of a different Kirblog. It might not even be considered one, who knows, but it's definitely a little bit more on the serious side. Still relevant to Voice October, my month-long of talking about various things regarding the voiceover industry, but something very particular that unexpectedly for me came up. I had been completely not keeping tabs on it, and then all of a sudden, in the last couple weeks, it came back up, and here we are. For those of you who don't know what I'm referring to, if you've not been following news outlets about it and articles and everything, it's been, I'm sure by the time this has come out, made its rounds. There is currently a strike happening for voiceover in video games between SAG-AFTRA and a certain fair number of publishers and studios, and it's quite a complicated matter, and there's been a whole lot of talk about it on social media and various places from a whole lot of different people. And so I, as someone who just joined the union earlier this year, I felt that it was my responsibility to do my part and spread the word and talk about this and get as much awareness spread as possible about it. But for this one in particular, I wanted to speak with somebody very educated on the matter. And in particular, I'm very glad to be joined unexpectedly, and by very last second. I think we planned this like not even a few days ago. Someone from the negotiation committee of basically, going through this whole thing and has been at the helm of trying to get some of these changes in order. I'm joined by the lovely and talented Mr. Crispin Freeman. Hi, thank you so much for coming on.
Hi there, Chris. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Obviously not, super directly relevant to the subject at hand, but, just for the folks out there who maybe don't know who you are already, I'll be presumptuous and say they probably do. But do you want to go over credits, particular shows, games, characters, things you want to that people would know you for the best?
Sure. I've been voice acting in one medium or another since about 1997. I started working dubbing Japanese animation. People may know me from shows like Hellsing and Naruto and Ghost in the Shell. I've also worked a lot in video games, most recently in Overwatch, playing Winston. I've actually been doing a lot of Blizzard games recently, whether it's World of Warcraft or Diablo 3 as the male wizard. But I've also played Firefly in the Arkham franchise of games as one of the villains against Batman. And honestly, I have to go look at IMDb to see all the crazy stuff I've been in. In American domestic animation, I've been in Young Justice playing Red Arrow and in Spectacular Spider-Man. And most recently, I've been working on Steven Universe as Connie's dad.
Yes.
Mr. Maheshwaran.
Which I love because I love the anime references of you and Mary Elizabeth as the two of them.
Yes.
That makes me happy. Well, going back to the video game stuff, of course, that's the big thing we're going to be talking about today. I guess to start off, because I've been living in California for a little over 2 years now, and I remember that a lot of the early meetings about this. Well, actually, you know what? First of all, I don't know if you know too much about this because I don't know what if you were still living in New York at the time or anything. But so this almost happened. This strike, I think, almost happened, or it was brought up or something a long time ago, if I'm remembering correctly. Because I remember hearing about it somehow. I must have been in like middle school or something. I wasn't even anywhere near the industry back then. I barely knew anything. But I do remember hearing that there was some kind of thing brought up like this. I don't know if it was the same kind of negotiation, as things have obviously changed a lot in the last, decade, 2 decades even. But do you have any information to start off with about that? And is it connected to this recent strike?
Sure. What people should probably understand is that SAG-AFTRA as a union usually renegotiates contracts every 3 years or so. So about every 3 years, the union comes together with producers in all sorts of different mediums and tries to hammer out the way that the contract should work in the future, because industries change. However, the video game industry changes more than just about anything.
Yeah.
The way technology moves in the video game industry means that things change much faster in the world of interactive media than they do in television, film, and other mediums. The big thing you're probably talking about is back in 2005, there was a sort of dust-up about the contract back then. The original video game contract had been drafted in the mid-'90s when video games were much, much different animals. And in 2005, there was a dust-up, and there was a possibility that there might be some sort of strike that was impending then. But back then, the Screen Actors Guild, SAG, and AFTRA, the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, were two separate unions, and they both negotiated separately with the video game producers. And so we didn't have the same unity as we have now. Over the past couple of years, SAG and AFTRA have merged into one union. So this is the first time we've been able to negotiate with the game producers as one union. Back in 2005, they would play one union against the other and say, well, if the Screen Actors Guild won't give us the terms we want, we'll go to AFTRA and get it from them. And that was, unfortunately, sort of effective in many ways. But that doesn't work anymore, because now we all work as one union, and so we're finally able to come together and say, hey, it's about time the video game industry grew up. What they used to tell us back in the early days is, well, video games, we don't know how we're going to be using actors. This is sort of experimental. You don't want to crush a new industry, in its birth pangs, trying to find its legs. There's all this talk about that. Well, nowadays, video games gross way more than movies. Mm-hmm. And so it's time for the video game industry to put on its big boy pants and deal with the sort of industry precedents that apply to any sort of entertainment medium in any genre.
Right. You mentioning the word unity earlier, which also, ironically, I love the fact that that's so fitting and that it's also a game-making program. But a word that was very much insisted by Jennifer Hale, who I'm sure all listeners will probably know of her extensive work on video games. But when I had first moved here in mid to late 2014, I remember the really early discussions about this that were opened up to anybody and everybody, not even just people in the union, about this. Jennifer Hale was getting a lot of people together and just trying to hammer out a lot of the specifics of okay, what are we asking for? What do we want to change? And et cetera. So that was kind of the early portion of it from what I remember, and then slowly kind of transitioned into meetings with at the actual SAG offices, and a whole lot of back and forth, and a whole lot of it was a very long journey over the last couple of years. So I guess to get the really basic stuff out of the way, what is the black and white, I guess, conflict of what is it you guys are asking for, what the publishers are not budging on, and what has now basically led to the strike finally happening?
Yeah. Well, what happened, which was sort of amazing, is that SAG-AFTRA really went to all the members. They did this real big outreach to all the people who regularly work the video game contract and said, what are your concerns? What's going on? How is this part of the industry working? And what do we need to do to help you? And over again, the actors, the voice actors, and the performance capture and motion capture actors were telling the union, look, there are some practices here that are unsafe. There are practices here that are disrespectful. And you know what? Maybe we should have some shared prosperity when a game grosses $500 million, $750 million, $1 billion on its release. And so there were basically 4 points that came out of these discussions that we went into the negotiations with now 19 months ago. Mm-hmm. The first was the idea of transparency. The problem when we work on video games nowadays is that they're unwilling to tell us what we're going to be working on. They'll say, we're going to have you in Soldier A in some war game, and then it's only later that we find out it's Call of Duty or some other massive game. This is really unfair. I don't know anyone who would go to work without knowing what they're working on. Mm-hmm. Now, the video game companies say that they need to keep things under wraps, they need to keep it secret, and we understand that. And so we've told them, look, in the audition process, if you need to keep things secret because you're worried about somebody leaking something, that's understandable. Mm-hmm. So how about just at the time of booking, right? When you decide, all right, that's the actor we want to use, when you call them up or you call their agent up to hire them, that's when you need to tell them, hey, we'd like to hire you to work on Call of Duty or Halo or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. They said even that was impossible. And we thought, well, that's just not fair. That's just unreasonable to be asking people to come to work and they don't even know what they're working on.
So real quick, I actually want to interrupt real quick because I know we're going to go through each of the specific things. Now, what I've been following this. We're recording this on Tuesday the 25th, St. Crispin's Day, apparently. How fitting. Yes. And this is going to be going up on the 29th. Now, I've been keeping a relatively close eye on what a lot of different people have been saying, people who are in the know and people who aren't so much in the know, and seeing a lot of different responses to all the different parts of these demands. I'm going to actually play devil's advocate because while I certainly understand why all of these things are being brought up, say someone's like, well, why does it matter that you're getting paid, you're doing the work, etc. Now, to you guys, to us guys, rather, now that I can include myself in that, what is the value to the transparency of knowing what the project is and the specifics that would matter to you as that cog of the machine, more or less?
Well, that's a really unfortunate question, right? What does it matter what you know? I mean, are you really comfortable going to work for somebody and you have no idea what you're working on? I mean, just from an ethical standpoint, it seems wrong, right? But in terms of the fairness of the situation, our agents cannot negotiate in good faith if we don't know what the game is. All right. So from one standpoint, it's a matter of fairness, because if it's some huge blockbuster title, then our agents negotiate differently than if it's, a beginning title that's never had any proven track record. Right. So they will negotiate differently. Also, it would be great to know what kind of game it is so we can decide whether we even want to be a part of it. There are many voice actors who are so tired of doing damage to their voice that if they knew it was Call of Duty, they'd say, you know what, I just don't want to scream grenade and ruin my throat. I want to pass on this. Or, if they could tell us the context of the game, then we'd know if there's content that maybe we might object to. I was called on to pulled into a game. I didn't know what the game was until I got there. Turns out it was Mafia 3. And they wanted me to use the N-word as this racist character a lot through the game. It would have been nice to know that that's what was going on before I agreed to do the game and before I was in the studio with the microphone in my face, where it's really difficult to say, you know what, I'm not sure this is cool. And they go, great, well, this actor is difficult to deal with. We don't want to hire him anymore.
Right.
It's just unheard of in any situation for an actor to go to work on something and they don't know what it is.
Well, rewinding too, another important point that kind of leads into one of the other ones is the stuff about vocal stress, which I imagine probably goes hand in hand with the transparency of like, okay, if this is, even if we can't know exactly what the title is, it's like, this is a war game. Inherently, there is going to be, X amount of hours of screaming. There's going to be this many sessions, etc. Is the vocally stressful stuff, is that very much hand in hand with the transparency, would you say?
Well, the transparency can certainly help with vocal stress, right? But there was a game that I worked on called Lair, and the premise of the game is that you were fighting on Dragonback. And if they had told me that I would have to be screaming at people on Dragonback for hours and hours, that would have been great to know if what the notion of the game was. They just told me it was a fantasy game.
Right.
And fantasy games, that's usually not that big of a deal. But if they said, well, this game is called Lair, and the premise is you're on a dragon, and you're fighting on Dragonback and screaming at each other at a distance in midair, it might have given me pause. Or my agent might have said, hey, that's really stressful, damaging work for his voice. When he does one of your sessions, he's out of work for days at a time. You need to compensate him properly for the stressful stuff that you're doing.
Well, because especially like, I myself am still in my early portion of my career. I don't know nearly what it's like when you're working, on a week-to-week basis on a lot of different things, even just auditioning, that often as well. So I think that, because that is something, I really want this is a little more all-encompassing, but I want this to be an opportunity for people to be educated as to what this is like for people, because I think that a lot of folks who again, aren't in the know, they see like a lot of these demands and these things as like, oh, whatever, you're just whining, or you're just complaining, just be happy to be working, etc. But like, when you're in the position of these people who have been doing this for a long time, and that this is their livelihood, this is their job, like on a day-to-day, week-to-week, year-to-year basis, like it all adds up, and you have to be able to keep a balance so that you can continue to do it. And video games in general, I think, are arguably the most vocally stressful kind of maybe acting at all, So I think I think that more than anything else, I personally think that the mention of if something is going to be vocally stressful, and if possible, being able to show how much content you're going to have to be doing, and can you deal with that? Can you handle that? Is there a way for us to work out a schedule? I think that is the most important to me personally. That's the most important thing from what is being asked. Though there is more, so continue on the rest of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
When people first started having to work on computers long hours and they were typing and they found that their hands were hurting and they would say, God, my hands are hurting after typing all day. I'm not sure if this is good for me. People would often say, oh, you're just whining. You're just complaining. How hard can it be to sit at a desk and type all day? Well, now we know there's something called carpal tunnel syndrome, where you can do permanent nerve damage to your hands and your arms and be basically sort of hand crippled if you let this go on for too long. Mm-hmm. So when we're working on video games, you are accurate in saying that video games are some of the most taxing and demanding types of voiceover work that we do. We as voice actors have to try to train our voices to be instruments. I like to say that we train to be Formula One race cars, right? We're trying to groom our voices to be as smooth and as responsive as possible. And then in the world of video games, we're asked to slam them against the wall over and over and over again. This is not a great thing to do, and it can screw up all sorts of other projects that we need to do. We often video game voice actors have to schedule stuff that they know is going to be throat-ripping for Friday because it's going to take all the weekend just to be able to speak again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and hopefully this sort of segues into the notion of vocal stress, okay? So that was the second thing that we were talking about, and it was one of the huge things that many voice actors were talking about. They were just blowing out their voices. And when I say blowing out their voices, I'm not saying just having laryngitis. I'm talking about bleeding from the throat. We've seen these cameras where they put them down people's throats. We have doctors at UCLA who treat our voice actors who say, you should not be doing this. We've had actors like Steve Blum who have bled from the throat, vomited in the booth, passed out in the booth, trying to do these characters for people, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when you do that, you are damaging these people's livelihood. They cannot turn around the next day and record a commercial with a nice casual tone in their voice because they sound like this now.
Yeah.
You can't come back and reprise your animated character in a show the next week because you can't sound the same. Mm-hmm. This is literally threatening people's livelihood and their ability to play the kind of characters that allow them to put food on the table. And so we realize that not all video games are this stressful. When I go in to play certain video games, it's more just what we call normal phonation. Mm-hmm. You know, when I worked as the male wizard on Diablo 3, most of the time I was speaking sort of what you would call standard Lord of the Rings type dialogue. You know, it wasn't screaming grenade for 4 hours.
Yeah.
And we as voice actors understand that in a lot of games, characters need to die. You know, there needs to be battle cries and attacks and damages. And so we're used to, at the end of a session, for 15 or maybe 20 minutes, putting in the noises that we need to do. That's not what we're talking about, right? That's totally normal. That's expected. But when it goes past 15 or 20 minutes, that's when it gets really damaging. And that's when we said, look, if it's going to be more than 15 or 20 minutes, if it's going to be 2 hours or 4 hours of screaming grenade and battle grunts at the top of our lungs, that's unacceptable. We can't do 4 hours of that. We can do 2 hours. So can we limit vocally stressful sessions, only the ones that are vocally stressful like that, to 2 hours? And we were basically told that's impossible.
Well, and also I think worth bringing up too, because it's certainly not like a one-sided situation. Like, actually, good example, a franchise that both of us actually have worked on, separated by quite a long amount of time, but the Tales series, which was a cup of tea. And the people who work there are fantastic. And I'm going to be presumptuous and assume they probably did this with you back in the day. But at least for me, it's like, okay, we're going to save all of the battle prompts and attacks and screaming stuff for the end. We will save all of that for your last session and, you know, all your playable character stuff and everything. And sure, like, you're not that you're not going to ever be, you know, having dramatic screaming moments, you know, in the middle of the dialogue stuff. But the genuinely vocally stressful stuff is intelligently saved for the end so that it's not, you know, going to destroy you. You know, which is typically how I personally think it should go. And I think that people have learned with how many games like that there have been to set things up in that way. But yeah, when you have a game that is like, 70 to 90% full volume, dramatic screaming that is just going to destroy you by the end of it, then, there has to be a lot more precaution taken into place, I would think.
Yeah. I mean, when I play Firefly in the Arkham games, I'm doing this crazy voice as Firefly. Now, I can't do that for 4 hours. It's just not possible. And so, there has to be an understanding that sometimes what we're doing vocally can be permanently damaging if we do it for too long. And there are some actors, like myself, who can basically say, guys, I'm done here, right? I'm at a point in my career when I can say that. But this contract is to protect the little guy, to protect the newbies in the industry who are just going to say, no, I can keep going, and then do permanent damage to themselves.
Yeah.
That's not acceptable.
Which is, actually, speaking of the little guy, I have a very important thing about that I want to get to later on, but I do want to continue on and as far as the demands. So we have transparency, notification of vocal stress. What else we got?
The next one was stunt coordinators. We've had reports from our motion capture brethren and from actors who are not as experienced with motion capture that they find themselves in the motion capture stage, what's called the volume, and there aren't the appropriate people in place. There isn't the appropriate stunt coordinator there to make sure that the motion capture stuff that's being done is safe, right? And this is a problem where sometimes the people who get to decide whether a stunt coordinator is qualified or not are the employers themselves, and sometimes they hire their best friends and say, oh yeah, he knows how to do stunts. And we have stories of people like one of our committee members, Phil Lamar, swinging from the rafters in Shadow of Mordor because he had to be strung up like a chicken, and there was no stunt coordinator on set to make sure that he was safe. On top of that, Phil isn't a stunt performer. He doesn't know how to do that without hurting himself necessarily.
Yeah.
And again, you're in a position where the actor goes, well, I don't want to let them down, so I'm going to do it. And what's really sad about the whole lack of, sort of stunt coordinator on set when it's necessary is that the stunt coordinator could actually save the game company's money. If they could come in and look at the script and break it down and say, okay, this is a stunt, this is not a stunt, then they can put all the stunts on the same day and actually save the company's money. But instead, the companies are telling us, well, just trust us. We know what a stunt is and what a stunt isn't. You'll be fine. Well, unfortunately, too many people have got hurt, and our motion capture brethren are saying, this is unacceptable. We can't keep doing this.
Right.
We've got to have more safety on set.
Now, obviously, this particular thing has become, I think, much more prominent and important in the last 10 years because now mocap has become a lot more common in video games, like on the whole. And especially when, and again, devil's advocate, I'm sure that when it comes to like something that is a little bit more grounded, like if it's just like, people walking around and they just kind of want the more naturalistic sort of, movements or whatever, sure, then maybe you have an argument there. But when you've got, like Mordor or like Last of Us or, go back to the army games again, where it's like, you're tumbling and having to swing weapons around and et cetera. And it's like, and somebody could, and sometimes do, get hurt. And I think it's more than reasonable, and regarding like, whether like what is like more expensive or not expensive, it's like, I guess like from my perspective, I don't, know the logistics of that necessarily of like, if that's the case, because I don't know what, the going rates or whatever for stunt coordinators even are. But I would imagine that for the sake of everybody's well-being and the end product collectively, that it would be more worth it than to not do it. So I would see you on that, honestly.
I mean, I guess you can play devil's advocate and engage in a lot of hypotheticals. But what we've been asking for in those three requests are precedents.
Right.
There's precedents for all of those in any other contract. No other actor goes to work not knowing what they're doing. No other actor is asked to destroy their voice or their body if the work is extremely stressful. They reduce the session times in order to accommodate the physicality of a person. And no one goes and gets drunk from the rafters without a stunt coordinator. So I'm not sure what the devil's advocate position on it is, except that we want to be treated safely, and this is common practice in any other medium that actors work in.
Which, on that note, too, and why this is so important, because we're talking more than anything about the AAA games. And the AAA games have become not merely video games anymore, they've become like cinematic interactive experiences. And now, I'm not going to get into the whole discussion of like whether that's a good or bad thing necessarily, because that's a whole other animal I'm not going to touch. But nonetheless, there is a standard of quality that is expected now with these massive, games that are treated super realistically and like with all, the production value and these millions and millions of dollars that are put into them. And, if that's what the standard is now, then, bravo for it reaching that point, especially so quickly, going back to the beginning. But nonetheless, like what Crispin's saying about how this is the standard for every other type of acting and every other medium, where it's like, yeah, this is what's expected, like for everybody's, safety and well-being and just being taken care of. I think that it's more than reasonable, which I guess then finally goes to the fourth thing.
So the fourth proposal we had was a notion of what we called shared prosperity. Now, people keep throwing around the word residuals, and unfortunately, that's not really what we're asking for. I understand why people use it is because it's the word and the term they're most familiar with. Mm-hmm. But if you allow me to explain just for a moment, residuals are payments to an actor in perpetuity when their performance gets used in different mediums. So if I work on an animated film or an animated series, and that animated series gets released on DVD, I get a payment. If that animated series goes to Netflix and people watch it over and over again, I get a payment. And I keep getting payments as long as they keep watching the show. So that's a residual, right? It goes to a different medium and it works in perpetuity. We understand that that's not how the video game world works. So we never proposed anything that was actually a residual. What we proposed was to have some sort of shared prosperity. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that when you have a game that is making $1 billion, then everyone should share in the prosperity of that game. Mm-hmm. Everyone should get a bit of a bonus for that. And we put forth an incredibly conservative structure for how that could work. Basically, a game would have to sell 2 million copies before any additional payment would be paid to the actors. And not only was it a high bar that we were trying to set because we didn't want to overly burden the video game producers, but we even capped it. It's not in perpetuity. There are payments that are supposed to go out at 2 million, 4 million, 6 million, and 8 million. And if you sell more than 8 million units, you're done paying the actors. You don't have to pay anymore. So we capped the number, and we even capped the payment structure. So basically, if I were working on a game and it got to 2 million units, I would get a certain payment, but not beyond a certain amount, no matter how much I had worked on the game. So to give you an example, if I worked on a game and I did one session on the game, I get paid a scale session fee, which is $825.50, right? So that's what I get for 4 hours of doing my work on the game. If the game sold 2 million copies, I would be entitled to only an additional payment of $206. It basically is a quarter of a session fee, but it helps to put it in actual numbers, right?
Right.
And then I'd only get another $206 if it sells 4 million copies. And then again at 6, and then at 8, and then I'm done.
Right.
Now, if I've worked 4 or more sessions on a video game, the most I could make is one more session fee, another $825.50. So if I've worked 4 more sessions, I could have worked 20 sessions, 30 sessions on a game. If that game sold 2 million copies, I only get one more session. I only get another $825.50. That's it. So we've capped it both in terms of when you have to make the payments and how big the payments can be. That's it.
Right.
And the problem is that the numbers didn't matter. They basically said, it's not about the money, it's about the principle.
Right.
You know, if we do this, we'd have to do it for everybody. And we just looked at them in shock and said, what, you're telling me that you don't reward your team when your game makes $1 billion?
Right.
We chose these numbers specifically. And when we looked at last year, the only 3 games that would have triggered any of these back-end payments were Star Wars Battlefront, Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto.
Right.
These are the biggest blockbuster titles on the block, right? And you're telling me you can't handle $200, $800?
Yeah.
It's very confusing to us. So yeah, that's basically we just tried to say, hey, we want some respect for the fact that you are using our likenesses in the game, you're using our voices in the game, you love putting us in your commercials and all your trailers, you love trotting us out at Comic-Con and other media events to help promote the sales of your game. You think maybe we could get a little consideration for that? And they told us, well, that's not what we do. That's not how we do business. But we know that there are developers who get bonuses. They may be higher up the food chain at companies, but they do get bonuses when their game goes very well. We have data that shows that different game producers pay out millions of dollars in bonuses to people in their company. And they said, well, we're a Silicon Valley company. They don't do that in Silicon Valley. Yes, they do. Silicon Valley offers stock options to people when they come to work in the company. They do share the prosperity. So it was really confusing. And for 19 months, we were running around in circles about this.
A quick story I want to share related to this about a game that I know that you're familiar with, Dust and Elysian Tale, which for those of you who have not, first of all, please play it because it's brilliant. But basically the game was made by one guy, Dean Dodrell, and he had a writer friend, a sound designer friend, and a bunch of voice actors that were cast and directed extensively with tons of blood, sweat, and tears put into by Devin Mack, who Tome fans are all familiar with as well, and he's a wonderful guy. And that was an indie game, not only an indie game, but one that was not crowdfunded, and didn't have like a big publisher or whatever. It was a small project that was made by virtually one guy and a couple of his friends. And despite that, it did well. It's not like a bajillion dollar selling, hit or whatever, but it did well enough. And regardless of that, Dean was incredibly kind to, and I had I think 2 lines. I was like a soldier in one level of that. And he sent every single member of the cast a little bonus. Wasn't a ton of money, but just the thought of him doing that for something that small scale, I was incredible to me, and I was like, wow, this is really thoughtful. So maybe the shared prosperity is like the one that is perhaps the most polarizing to people. I've seen the most amount of disagreements and agreements on that one, if anything. But I think that story is worth sharing and up to anybody's interpretation of. Think about that: a very small project with no crowdfunding, not a giant publisher, and not a runaway hit, still had the decency and made the effort to extend that to the cast. And relevantly as well, that was a game that I have no bones about saying, because the performances were brilliant and the reviews have not lied, that the voiceover in the game was a huge part of the appeal, and I think why it was so successful, because it made the characters in that story shine, and it made an incredibly a memorable experience, which is also something I'm going to get into when we talk about a certain hashtag a little later on. But so backing up, so those are the demands.
Yeah. So and what you've just outlined is really important.
Right.
And let me emphasize that I am a huge supporter of independent game developers. And independent game developers know that they're coming together as a team to make something happen. Okay. And I love working with independent game developers when I have the chance. I just attended IndieCade recently and talked to a whole bunch of developers. Here's the deal. When we talk about shared prosperity, often the developers will say, well, that's not fair. And they need to understand that we are not fighting with them. The developers are our friends. They can be very close to us. It's the publishers who are trying to turn the developers against us. The publishers are so used to having all of this labor that's not willing to sort of push back out of fear of reprisal, okay? And they're deathly afraid that people might actually stand up and say, this is unfair. I mean, we're talking about it being unfair, screaming our lungs out for 4 hours. It is criminal the way that developers are often treated working on video games. The crunch times and the 12, 14-hour days, 7 days a week for 6 months at a time, the sleeping bags under their desks. I get it. It's awful, right? And the problem is that these publishers are deathly afraid that someone's going to stand up and say enough is enough. Fortunately, the actors have a union, and that gives them more leverage in negotiations than individuals could possibly have. Mm-hmm. So we are doing our best to try to blaze a trail of saying, hey, you got to treat people fairly. And if we can establish this precedent, a rising tide lifts all boats. It could apply to everyone. And what's even greater is that the union has realized that there are people who want to play nice, the people who want to respect their fellow creators and collaborators. Those people are independent game developers. And so the union has come up with a low-budget contract specifically aimed at helping independent game developers work with union talent, both voiceover and motion capture. And that's something that's very near and dear to my heart, and that's why I've been trying to do more outreach to the independent game community to say, hey, you want to work with union actors? By all means, let's make this as easy as possible to help you work with us on this stuff. So I'm really excited about the new low-budget contract that SAG-AFTRA has put out to help work with independent game developers, because they know that they want to play by the rules. They just want to make cool stuff. It's the publishers who are used to pushing their employees around who don't like people pushing back and saying, hey, enough is enough.
So great segue. With speaking of that, I guess now leading into what finally caused the push, what finally led to, well, this is it. It's happening after 19 months of back and forth.
19 months is longer than any contract at SAG-AFTRA has ever been negotiated. We've never had a contract languish this long in negotiations. And even though a year ago, we did a strike authorization vote, and we got close to 97%, I believe it was 96.55% authorization for a strike vote, which is unheard of. And we showed them that we were serious about that. They still hemmed and hawed, and we did our best. We came in good faith to negotiate with them for another year, trying to find some sort of compromise that could make things work. In the end, the producers gave all sorts of reasons why they couldn't do any kind of back-end payments. They told us it was too complicated. The accounting was too difficult. Never mind, you could figure this out on your smartphone in a Google Sheets app, right? This is so easy to do. But they told us it was impossible. And instead, they insisted that they wanted to do some sort of upfront payment scheme rather than a back-end payment scheme. And we said, okay, what are you suggesting? And they suggested this very strange table where they would pay us a certain amount every time we came in to do a video game recording session, a little bit extra, $50 on your second session, $100 on your third session, maybe another 100 on the fourth session. It was a very odd thing, and it would go up to like 8 different sessions. And that's where you'll see that number sometimes in the news. It'll say $950. Well, no, they weren't offering $950 up front. If you'd recorded 8 or more sessions, you might see that $950. But the problem is that if you're doing 8 or more sessions on a game, you're usually a lead and you're negotiating a better contract. And they said that if you negotiated a better contract or you got paid over scale, none of this table would apply to your payment. So basically, it was sort of pointless. The people who work on games usually do 4 sessions or less. And those people really wouldn't see much improvement at all right? But you know what? We said, hey, if that's what you want to do, fine. We will accept your table. We will accept the fact that that any overscale payments will disqualify this table. We will accept that this table only applies to games that have 10 or more sessions. They had all these different things they wanted. We said, fine. If that's going to make you happy, fine. But we know that there are producers who would rather not have to pay all this up front, right? They don't have the budget for it. So can we have as an option in a contract the back-end structure that we're talking about? It's only going to hit the wildest, most popular games. And so most producers will never have to pay it. We understand that for some reason that wigs you out. So we'll give you the option of the upfront payment. And if you do the upfront payment, you will never have to pay on the back end, right? You are free and clear. You've got a clear path to doing things the way you want. We just want the option in the contract if other producers want to do it the other way. They categorically refused. They said that was impossible, that there was just no way they could allow it. And it backed us into a corner. Because what are we supposed to do then? Great. So now what? we just have to abide by you, and now you're making it more difficult for other producers to do work because they have to pay more up front. It was very strange. It was like, well, you won't even give us an option you'll never have to invoke just for other producers who might want to do it differently. And it was just too much. We said, look, I'm sorry. You won't handle the vocal stress issue. You won't address the stunt coordinator issue. You won't tell us the name of the game. And now you're saying that this structure can't even be an option in the contract. We have no more to say. There's nothing left to do here. Mm-hmm. And so they forced us into a position where we had to strike. We don't want to strike. Actors want to go to work. We want to do this. But after a while, you get tired of being pushed around.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're finally here. It's in fact, by the day this goes up, it'll have been over a week since it's officially happened. And by now, already there's been a picket line, which I heard went very well, actually, massive turnout. And we're into the thick of it. And while I'm sure everybody would certainly hope that it's it ends sooner rather than later, no one can say 100% for sure what is going to happen next. So now here we are, and now now I'm going to move on to the hashtag. So let's talk a little bit about performance matters.
Before we jump to performance matters, though, I also want to emphasize that this strike does not affect all video game publishers.
Okay.
It only affects the publishers that we've been negotiating with that have been sort of obstreperous and resistant to any sort of compromise on these issues. Mm-hmm. There are other video game producers who play by the rules, who actually do quite well, and we can still work with them. Also, if there's any game producer that decides that they're willing to find our terms acceptable, they are welcome to contact the union. We have a contract ready to go. Mm-hmm. It's not that dissimilar in much of its structure from the independent game contract, except the numbers are slightly different, but that they could do. So that's the thing. We're striking specific game companies, not the entire industry.
Right. In fact, actually, good point before moving on to the hashtag bit. I do want to talk about that because I think there's actually been a fair bit of confusion. It seemed like there was some impression put out that it's like, okay, yes, these are the terms, but we don't want anybody to be doing games at all unless it fits these like very specific kind of deals and everything, whether it's a union or non-union game, et cetera. But there's a public, I believe, list of what is fair game and more specifically what is not. Right. Now, and if I'm remembering it, it's like a 9 or 10 specific companies and studios. Is that right?
Right. If you go to SAG-AFTRA.org/interactive, mm-hmm. It'll give you a list of the publishers that we're striking. And there's a link there where you can hit a link and figure out which games have been struck. It's been really tough to put that list together mm-hmm. because they won't give us the names of the game, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's been really challenging to try to figure out what's going on. But if you want to see which game companies and which games are struck, head to SAG-AFTRA.org/interactive, and there's a list there. And even now, as performers, we have to contact the head of the interactive department at SAG-AFTRA and say, can we audition for this show or not? This game or not? What's the situation?
Mm-hmm. Which I'll have a link to that in the description as well, because that's going to be important for any up-and-comers that are listening to this. So let's talk about support. Performance Matters evolved also from back in the early meetings put together by Jen Hale, which was very nice. It was previously, I think, something like hashtag One Voice or Unity or something like that, and then Performance Matters became, I think, the agreed-upon bit, because as I was talking about earlier, where especially these big games are very dependent on a standard, good quality series of performances by really, really good performers, in order to meet the level of quality that is now expected in games. We have moved, and I'm at the risk of hopefully not offending anybody, we have moved past the days long since, just like how we very rarely get, truly bad, bastardist anime dubs anymore. We are so far beyond the days of you were almost a Jill sandwich and what am I fighting for and stuff like that. There is a general standard all across the board for all games that, by and large, everybody understands is what needs to be met. even if it's not the creme de la creme, there's a bar, right? So, and I think that now more than ever, because of the amount of information that is out there about how the voiceover world works, and to which a lot more people know what voice actors even are now compared to even, 10, 20 years ago, in tandem with video games evolving. So let's talk a little bit about performance matters and the spread of that, and what can people do to spread awareness and to support the general cause and idea of what you guys are trying to go for?
Well, I think that the most important thing that people can do to support this situation is to understand that a lot of this is going to be litigated in social media and other media outlets, all over the country. And there's going to be a lot of people arguing back and forth, sometimes without all the information or wildly speculating about how things are supposed to go. The best thing you can do is point them to the SAG-AFTRA interactive, SAG-AFTRA.org/interactive website, where there are PDFs where you can download all these 4 points: transparency, vocal stress, stunt coordinators, and shared prosperity, so that people are not wildly speculating. I've seen wrong numbers in even major news outlets, major newspapers, about what the proposals were. So give people the facts. I'm not the kind of person to encourage people to fight with people online, because that feels like you just go down the drain and it can eat your life. So I would not necessarily ask anyone to fight with anyone online, but just point them to the websites where the information is. There's a wonderful website called Game Actors for All. And there's a fabulous audio there that Steve Blum recorded. I'm sure your listeners are probably familiar with Steve Blum as a voice actor, Spike Spiegel and Cowboy Bebop, Wolverine, and a bunch of the X-Men animated series. And he's done more video games than anyone else. He's in the Guinness Book of World Records for video games. So if there's anyone who works in the trenches of video games, it's Steve Blum.
Absolutely.
And he has a fabulous recording on his website where he talks about the unbelievably difficult conditions he has to work under as a voice actor. He's also released it, I believe, as a letter that you can read as well. But point people to industry people, actors who are working in this, and see what they're saying, right? And stop speculating or stop putting words into people's mouths. Just point them to these websites and say, look, these are the facts on the ground. And if you're going to debate these issues, let's debate it realistically. Let's not just say, well, you don't deserve that. It's so funny to me that somehow, because we are asking for safety and respect and a little bit of shared prosperity when something is grossing more money than any Hollywood movie has ever grossed, that we're being silly about something. But that's just the tool the publishers want to use. They want to turn employees against themselves because, God forbid that we decide enough is enough and that we want to have to be considered properly by the publishers.
Yeah, it's funny because I was going to describe, Steve is such a perfect literal and figurative voice of this issue as the person who has been, made such a huge mark on the industry with all the, hundreds upon hundreds of games that he's worked on, and all of which the great performances that he's given as a result of them. I will have a link to that as well. It's a real quick, short, sweet, to the perfect point, 7-minute or so audio clip recorded by him. And there's a text version as well if you feel like reading it. But of course I would want to listen to it because I just love listening to Steve's voice.
There's also a wonderful interview on National Public Radio with Jennifer Hale, where they had her on, I don't know if it was All Things Considered or some of the news programs. And they basically, the interviewer said, well, isn't this a cushy job? Aren't you being basically unreasonable? And she turned to him and said, can you make the sound of being sliced through the center of your body by a sword? And he tried, he really tried. He's like, ah! He didn't do it very well, but he tried. And then she said, great, can you do the sound of being burned alive? And he goes, ah! Great. And then she asked him, so how does your throat feel? And he went, oh, I see what you mean. Once people actually put themselves in the position that we are in, they'll realize, oh yeah, this is a little crazy, the conditions you're asked to work under. And that's why the majority of our proposals were all about safety and respect. We never went into these negotiations asking for some sort of huge upfront salary increase. That was never on our agenda. So it's just disingenuous to say, oh, the actors are being greedy. Not at all. That was never what we intended. We came in wanting to sort of get things back to the norm of how the entertainment industry works. This is how business is done because it's fair, it's ethical, and it's reasonable.
Now, talking about the spread on social media, something that I'm sure a few different people have put this out here, but Yuri Lowenthal I saw first. So therefore he's the one I will mention. Mentioned a bit about, hey, when you tweet it with hashtag performance matters, hey, it can be something as positive as tell a quick story about a voice performance that really positively impacted you, that did matter to you, that helped make an experience with a particular game so stand out. Which I imagine is, the spirit of that is to show the publishers and the people making the decisions of, oh, well, this doesn't matter, whatever, who cares? No, actually, it does matter a lot more than you think, and we don't want it to be this way, and these people do deserve this.
During the negotiation process, there was one round of negotiations that we opened up to every member of SAG-AFTRA. So any member of the union could come in and sit and watch. They couldn't say anything, but they could watch. And what they watched was the lawyer for the game producers say into all the voice actors' faces and the motion capture actors' faces, well, the voices don't really matter that much. And that's what Tara Strong tweeted. That's what blew her mind. She was sitting in the audience that day and said, are you kidding me? He also said, well, we know you guys are Mercedes, right back to the Formula One metaphor I was using before. Mm-hmm. He says, we know you guys are Mercedes, but, all we really need are Hondas. and it was like, and the whole negotiation process was like that, where it was like, how are we not supposed to be offended by what's coming out of your mouth right now?
It's such an antiquated perception, too, because it's like video games used to be known as having stereotypically really, really bad voiceover. And that is, like I said, it's such a thing of the past. There are so many people that know, again, there's a bar, there's a standard set. Whoever it was that said that, it's like, are you living in, the late 90s or the early 2000s or something where that's how it was? Because things have changed so much in so long ago by this point.
I don't know. Their lawyer is old enough. Maybe the last game he played was Pac-Man. I have no idea. And he just thinks it's waka, 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 and that anyone can do that. And he's never seen FemShep. I have no idea.
I cut you off, though. Carry on. Sorry.
No. So, I realized that it's incredibly discouraging. It's one thing to go into negotiations and to be tough about it, right? Tough, but reasonable, and saying, hey, let's come to this. But over and over again, they would put forth proposals, and the way they would talk about it was just insulting. And we thought, we didn't come here asking for the moon. We didn't come with a bunch of ridiculous proposals. Oh, we want caviar, and we want a Rolls Royce to pick us up at home, and you've got to pay us, $5,000 every time we walk in the room. We didn't do any of that. Everything we came to the table with was stuff that happens to be industry standard across Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And we thought, well, you guys, come on, you're making more money than movies. We can do this reasonably and fairly, right? The secondary payment structure we offered is so easy and is peanuts compared to what residuals pay out on television, on film, on commercials. It's nothing in comparison. So can't this work? And just over and over again, stonewalled for 19 months. What else are we supposed to do?
For all players who understand this, that are hearing this right now, that get this, it is imperative that people be educated as to why this is the case. This is not blowing smoke up anybody's ass. This is not, unreasonable as far as I'm concerned, as far as everybody that does this for a living generally agrees is concerned. These are the facts. This is what the situation is. This is how it is. And I think it's really important for people to know, because when people know, they all understand. From my perception, everybody that's, oh wow, wait, this is how it is. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. And they're all on board, and they're all fully in support of that. So,
and let me address that directly, okay? Mm-hmm. Because often people get their perception of actors and the lives of actors from A-list celebrities. And they think we're all driving Rolls Royces and living in Beverly Hills and eating nothing but champagne and caviar, okay? That is not the life of a voice actor. A voice actor almost very rarely gets paid above the union minimums to work on their stuff. You can think of us as more blue-collar actors, right? They're amazed. I'm often asked, "Oh, if they brought back some character of yours, would you play it?" And my answer is, "Do actors refuse work? Am I an actor? Yes, I will come back and play it. Are you insane?" Because they think that we're Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie. And I understand that in their minds, we're probably that famous. But in the world of Hollywood, we are not. We are what we like to call day players. We come in, we do our job, we go home, and hopefully we've got enough money to pay our bills and pay our car insurance and get on with life. And so what happens is that people think we're being greedy. You know, one of the arguments I get is, well, these developers put in so many hours, and you come in for just 4 hours and you get paid all this money. It's only 4 hours. Well, that's not comparing apples to apples. When you buy a painting, a fine art painting, you're not paying just for the materials and for the time when the brush was touching the canvas, right? You're paying for the artistry of the artist who put it together. And that artist had to spend years studying, practicing, developing his craft. All this happened before you even met that person, right? They invested their own time, blood, sweat, tears, and lots of money to make this happen in order for you to get this piece of art that's so great. So people need to understand that while it may look like a voice actor or a performance capture actor is just coming in for 4 or 8 hours and doing this and getting paid, that may be their only gig for a week or more. Mm-hmm. On top of that, they're having all this expense that they have to take care of at home, right? They have to pay to take classes to improve their skills. They have to pay to have their own home studio where they can record things and keep all their equipment and all their software and everything else up to date. They have to pay in order to audition. People don't understand that we basically work to get work. Mm-hmm. I'm at home auditioning every day. And if I book 1 out of 10 things I audition for, that's amazing, right? Yeah. So those 10 auditions, I may be recording at home. I may be driving around the city. I may be going to my agents. I may be going to a casting director's office. I'm working. I'm spending a lot of time busting my butt just to be able to work. And people think, well, you just come in and do this thing. No, we are freelancers. We are out there beating the bushes, trying to see what we can come up with. We don't just go to the same office every day, right? And so it's not apples to apples, not at all. And that's what people don't understand. They romanticize the life of an actor. Hi, diddle-dee-dee, an actor's life for me. Yeah, that's great. But that's not actually what it's like. You know, we're not driving around in fancy cars to make this happen. And so that's I think, the most important thing that people need to understand. And our hearts go out to the developers who have to work and grind every day. It's not fair for them either. But we've all got to find some way to change this industry and help it grow up and mature so that people, both developers and performers, are not getting chewed up and spit out by this machine.
And I know we've gone over an hour by now. There is one last very important thing, which I'm actually very glad that when I put out a call to the negotiation committee and you responded. This is actually perfect that you were the one who answered the call, because I know that you're a big advocate of new talent. You've trained a lot of folks. You've trained folks I've worked with even and have known for many years. And the one last thing that I also think is important, especially because even in my early years, I get a lot of folks who talk to me about wanting to do this for a living. And people that do take it and not, just like, oh, I watch anime, I want to be in anime, and that's all I ever want to do in voiceover. Like, no, people who take it seriously that, want to have a future in this. There's been a lot on that front of the up and comer, amateur voiceover world of what do we do? What would be your advice to people out there, either maybe on the cusp of breaking in, have just broken in the last couple of years, are still very early on, maybe haven't even joined the union yet, or maybe they have, etc. What would you say to them was the wisest things perhaps to be doing in this time for however long this is going to be going on for?
I would say this is the time to be polishing your skills. This is the time to be making sure that you are professionally competitive. This is not the time to be breaking ranks, right? Because I don't think it would work anyway, but the voiceover community and the performance capture community are very small. And we know what people do, and that can reflect badly on people. So I understand that people need to put food on the table, and I would never want to put someone in huge, dire financial straits. But if there is any way that you can stand with us on this, it will only benefit you. A couple of $100 now versus all sorts of fairness years and years into the future. You have to make that sort of risk-reward assessment and say, well, what's the opportunity cost of going forward and making a little bit now and really messing myself over in the future? I think that's why they want to do this upfront payment. They're trying to dangle this sort of little Scooby snack in front of us, thinking we'll jump for it, thinking we're desperate enough to go for it. Well, guess what? We're not desperate. We're fed up.
Yeah.
So my advice would be find other avenues to do voiceover work in. We're not striking animation. We're not striking commercials. We're not striking other stuff. Work on independent video games. Any independent video game developer can use our low-budget contract today, right? So if you want to work on your own projects with your buddies and you want to do it union, go right ahead. You are free to do so. Just these big guys. Don't let them abuse us anymore. And if there's a video game company that's not on our list, then that's fine, because they're usually doing things properly and we don't have a problem with them. It's just this situation, right? And it really, it's about all of our futures.
And what, I'll add to that too. I'll be blunt, because I've seen this a couple places and it pisses me off. I'm going to be honest. This is absolutely not the time to be what you might perceive to be making your mark, because all of the big guys are going to be out of the game and this is your time to take advantage of. Don't. Because what Crispin just said about, a couple $100 now, is that worth, the fairness and everything that might come about if something gets, agreed upon later. It's also not worth potentially in this small world where everybody knows what everybody does and everybody keeps an eye. And if there has ever been a time where the union is rightfully going to be keeping a close eye on the actions of everybody, this is not a time to be destroying your career before it's even made. Be smart. Please, God, be smart.
and I would hope that people make their decision not based on fear of reprisal, right? Oh my God, I can't do this because I'm so afraid. Because that is also a disempowering mindset. And that's the mindset the publishers want us to have. They want us to be disempowered. Rather than choosing not to do it because there might be horrible consequences from other members or who knows what, rather value yourself. Realize that they want to take advantage of you. And that's unfair. Decide for yourself that you are worth more than this. In every other part of the industry as performers, they acknowledge that we are worth this. How come video games, which gross more than anything, have decided that we are worth less? So value yourself. Decide what kind of future you're going to have, right? Are you going to be the kind of person who just lets people walk all over you? Are you going to say, no, I'm worth more, and I refuse to let them walk all over me?
100% agreed. Yeah, if you take this craft seriously enough to want to be, or to even call yourself a professional, keep all of that in mind. It is all extremely important, extremely relevant. Even past this situation right now, those are very important things to keep in mind. If you're getting your feet wet in this world, and you really want to do this and you really do want to take this seriously, then keep all that in mind. Be smart, be professional. Even if you're not knocking it in the park and you're not a guy working every week or whatever, you can still be professional. And this is a time to prove yourself in that way.
People might feel like, oh, this is the end of the world, but I'm here to tell you, this has happened before. This will happen again. There are people who are comfy in their positions of power, and they have zero incentive to change the game because they're profiting from it. Literally change the game, pun not intended. But it always takes the small people to stand up, to unify, and push back for change to happen. And then when that change happens, people say, oh, well, it should have been this way all along. Right? So understand that this is part of a grand pattern of how things get done. Should it have to be this way? Should we have had to do this? No, God, we could have been so reasonable about this. But you know what? Sometimes this is the only way change happens. And then eventually it flips over and people go, wow, I'm so glad we did that. Look how much better things are because we did that.
I can only hope. I can only hope that this will not be lasting too far into 2017. But, time will tell. And I think that's going to wrap us up. Crispin, I'm going to have all the links to everything we talked about earlier in the description below. Any other things that are worth plugging or any other places they should go check out or anything that's relevant to this?
I think if it really matters to you, follow your favorite voice actors, right? Mm-hmm. You'll notice that all of us are singing the same song.
Yep.
And it really means the world to us when we see your tweets and your messages and whatnot in support. And understand that this is not about trying to punish gamers or consumers. This is not about trying to leapfrog the developers and somehow put them down. Not at all. It's just that there happens to be one union that has even a chance of standing against this, and it happens to be with the actors. And so this hopefully will be the sea change moment where the industry can start acting ethically and morally towards its employees.
Well, do your part, everybody. Stay educated, keep educated, spread the word, get all of this out there as much as possible. If you're listening to this, and I swear to God, this is not like a self-promotional thing, I just want people to know the facts. I truly, truly do. If it's not even through this, just through anything else that we've linked below, anything at all, any reputable source, from the horse's mouth, and there are many horses of which to get the information from, the mouths of. Please lend any support that you can. Don't forget the hashtag Performance Matters. Any and all little thing you can possibly do is tremendously appreciated by the voiceover community as a whole. Anything you can do to give back and to help out, no matter how small, is imperative at a time like this, and it's not unappreciated by any of us. So I think that's it. Crispin, thank you so much. This was really cool. I appreciate you giving up an hour of your time to do all this, and I can only hope that this will help in some small way.
Well, thank you for having me on, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify what's been happening.
Faux shiz. All right. Well, I'm going to end it here. I'm not going to have a little end tag as always. It's a little bit out of the ordinary for both a Kirblog and the Voice October stuff, but we're almost wrapping that up too. I hope that it's been enjoyable for everybody as well. I know, again, this is a little bit more on the serious side, but I felt this was very important and I wanted to have this, and this could not be more of a fitting month that was picked as the irony would be, as the coincidence would be. And that'll do it. So that's it for me. That's it for Crispin. And hopefully you'll be hearing us as soon as possible back in your favorite video games again before long. And we will see you all later. Farewell.